Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Robel, and today I am joined by Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva, who is the Chief Reinvention Officer at the Reinvention Academy. Nadya, it's awesome to have you with us.
I'm so happy to be with you, Andrew.
Perfect. So, if we look around, a lot of people, a lot of organizations seem to be talking about reinvention. The World Bank, PwC, Accenture. But it's clear that perhaps not everyone is fully aware of what reinvention really is. So if you could tell us in a couple of words what really we are talking about.
Well, simply put, reinvention is the only strategy in the age of volatility. If you think about what does it mean for an individual or an organization to survive and thrive in a constantly disrupted, turbulent, and uncertain world, the only way to do it is to continuously reinvent yourself ahead of the disruption. And that's what reinvention is. At the level of management theory, we are developing a new cross-disciplinary field that connects from strategy to innovation to change management and project management. So it's creating cohesion and integrity between fields that often compete in the real world companies and on the ground. And that's why so many companies go bankrupt, is because the different parts of a machinery that needs to be well oiled to stay on top of the game and keeping up with the trends are competing with each other, and the company is not able to cope with disruption.
So you mentioned one word, survival, and in our reinvention community, we constantly repeat that word. But survival often feels messy. It feels uncertain as well, and sometimes, in some circumstances, even desperate. So,
Mhm.
what's a reinvention story from your own life that didn't go smoothly, and what did you actually learn from that chaotic situation, from that
Mhm.
chaos?
Well, I speak about survival as a minimum. I do think it's not enough. I think
Mhm.
surviving is a very boring um, level. And I do hope we go into thriving and flourishing and joy and many other things. However, statistics, when we talk about organizational reality, are not anywhere close to that. Most companies do not survive in the medium, not even long term, in the medium term. So, just this century, Fortune 500 list lost more than half of the companies on that were present for a significant period of time. So most companies today cannot stay on and find a different way to exit reality, whether that's sometimes that's bankruptcy, sometimes it's acquisition, sometimes it's other form of survival that is less exciting. So we speak about survival as just the baseline. And my own life, of course, that's where my interest in this topic starts. I was born in the Soviet Union. I was born to a country, a Republic of Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, that had more than 40% of its population murdered in the period of 3 years by government. So our cultural code, our reality, our community had to face a potential of extinction. And the Soviet Union itself did not survive and collapsed in the
Mhm.
most unpredictable and spectacular fashion, you might say, with a massive spike in suicide rate. It was complete disintegration of economic ties and viability and so on. Kazakhstan was so unprepared for this that it took us almost 3 years to develop our own currency. So imagine living in a country that suddenly has no police, no government, no currency, and it's not a one-day event. It's a many, many years of reality. So for me, entering into my doctorate research, that was the question. Why do some organizations face disruption and come out stronger? About
Mhm.
10% of companies on average, while others are going bankrupt, and why some countries face fundamental threats and figure out how to reinvent themselves, and others collapse the way Soviet Union collapsed, with no vote and no prep and no thinking of how will we evolve. and why some individuals face disruption and find a way to build a new life, a new career, a new mission, and others lose themselves in the loss. That's been the basis of research, mainly because I come from a highly volatile and often tragic background.
Hmm. And when I look at reinvention, I think that one of the hardest bits of reinvention is really letting go, because we're so used to the current situation. We're so used to what we've been doing for years, and we're talking about doing that as individuals, but also as companies.
Mhm.
So what would be the hardest thing to release for you when you talk about reinvention?
Well, I think it's universal in both individual and organizational life is
Mhm.
giving up things we are so good at. It
Mhm.
starts with things such as diplomas and achievements. My own diplomas are currently often a source of light mockery among the young generation. For them, that's not an asset. That just ages me. That just gives them a sense of how old I am, not something to revere and use as a personal competitive advantage. Same at the organizational life. When we do research into organizations that were not able to reinvent on time, very often it's because they were so deeply attached to their past success. It feels like if it worked, why give it up? And that's the often the reason why companies disappear. So much so that I coined the term Titanic Syndrome specifically to mimic the tragic story of the Titanic disaster, where one of the reasons it fell and sank was the first deputy that was at the wheel during the collision, who was excellent at preventing collisions. And he did exactly right what would work with any other ship other than this
Mhm.
newest technological breakthrough, which was the Titanic, with their unique isolation of particular parts of the ship. If it was any other ship, he used his best practice and he was very known
Mhm.
for his past successes in averting collisions. So he followed it to a T. He did everything by the book. He used his own best practice. It's exactly what killed him. Because new technology, new reality, new context, new regulation, something changes. And what saved us in the past kills us today. And that is the hardest part. It feels so unfair. I worked so
Mhm.
hard to reach this level. I worked so hard to develop this best practice, and suddenly it's what destroys us. That's, I think, is the hardest part for me.
Mhm. And if we think about reinvention again, it sounds very empowering. We've been the way we've been talking about reinvention is really empowering. But at the same time, I have a feeling that for some people, it might have some hidden costs.
Mhm.
So, what are the biggest personal and professional sacrifices? You've mentioned that to some extent right now, that we have to let go to be able to evolve. Are there
Mhm.
any? Maybe they're not.
Well, there are always, you can look at them as cost if you are
Mhm.
fighting reality. Any living system reinvents. The tree lets go of leaves, and the nature gives up on things that don't work and goes through seasons, and it's always ebb and flow. There's never a static
Mhm.
situation, it's always dynamic. So reality is constant change, and fighting that reality is a source of a personal struggle and pain and
Mhm.
um, cost, if you will. But another part is just rolling up your sleeves and getting stuff done. That's the biggest cost, because reinvention is not a spectator sport. You don't sit on the couch and watch somebody else do this for you. You cannot outsource it. You
Mhm.
cannot outpace it. This is about you finding a beat at which your unique team or product or company needs to reinvent. And it is deeply, deeply rooted in your unique circumstances, your customers, your economic reality, your industry, the speed of change is quite different in different realities. So finding that cadence, finding that heartbeat, and then doing the work, getting up and starting a new round of reinvention. I often compare reinvention to taking a shower. If I don't take a shower on a regular basis, I begin to stink. Same with our products, same with our team practices, same with our leadership approaches, same with our corporate strategies or business models. If we don't wash them on a regular basis, they will begin to stink. And occasionally, again, green will develop. So, in that sense, that routine, proactive process, that's the cost. You cannot avoid it, you cannot win it, you cannot escape it, you cannot play it out. Nobody's immune anymore. There's no company that is protected anymore. There's no government, as you can see in the news, is protected anymore. Nobody's protected, but there's a beauty in that. There's a massive, massive normalization. It's a permission to let go of things that no longer serve us. Do not hold on so tightly to something that no longer serves us, just because we've always done it that way. That, I think, is the flip of the coin. That's the other side of the coin. That yes, there's a cost to it, and there's also an amazing, amazing opportunity.
What you just said reminded me of an interview I gave a couple of months ago in Bulgaria, out of all places, and we were talking about a region in Bulgaria that used to be, very industry heavy and focused on mining, and obviously, that transition from that industry to something more innovative is not easy. And the biggest challenge seems to be communicating that to the locals, the people who worked in mines for years. And it seems to me that on the one hand, there's no other way. They have to go through that process. But how would you communicate that to them so they can actually understand that there's no other way?
Well, I tend to work with people, not on people. Or I don't come in with answers. I come in with questions. And very often this kind of dialogue starts with very basic questions, which is, an average cycle of a business model in the 20th century was 75 years. You could run the same business for 75 years without any significant reinvention. The average life cycle of a business model today, according to our latest research, is 6. And in the mining industry, maybe you can get away with 10. And the reality is that even in the more conservative industries, it's still quite short period of time. And I asked them, what were the rules of the game in the long cycle? And they are the ones who are writing the rules. And then what are the rules of the game in the short cycle? And very quickly, people begin to realize that the rules have changed. We may like it, we may not, but if we want to live in this new world and have somewhat of a decent, less painful, less resistant, less fighting against reality situation, the more likely we are to open up to change. And another exercise that I love called Kill the Company exercise, Kill the Industry, where I ask people, what could kill your industry? What could kill your economy in this town? What could kill your company in the next 6 months? And once they start themselves exploring the many, many risks, the realization comes of how fragile everything is.
Yeah.
And how we need to be ahead of the game if we want to have any kind of choice in how our future looks.
When we look at it, not every reinvention seems to be a success. And I wanted to ask you if you could share a time, or perhaps when you worked with a company, or when you saw a company that tried to reinvent themselves, but it actually backfired. And what was the biggest sort of mistake made at the time?
We see a lot of cases that are both successful and unsuccessful. And I've had clients where after the first diagnosis, my answer to the CEO was, there's no way to save this company. We can find a way for a graceful exit that is humane towards everyone involved, then we will save all the assets that could be salvageable. But generally speaking, I myself see no way forward. Other times, we don't even accept clients because not everyone deserves to be saved. There are companies that simply don't produce value anymore. They're just, moving chairs on the Titanic, so to speak. So there's no reason to engage. And there are companies that do have a chance. Why invest part of your life and care and passion into something that has no future when there's somebody standing in line to get a chance? But sometimes it's basic mistakes. So I myself was not part of that case, but I loved hearing from the CEO about early 2000s case of Gorenje, which is a Slovene company that at the end reinvented beautifully, but the middle moment was very painful when the company that historically has always competed on high level of engineering and quality had this moment where they thought they will compete on high-end design and brought a whole bunch of specialists from Italy and other places to create a more provocative, let's put it that way, high-end design for their kitchen appliances and so on. And as you know, the wisdom of the remarkable Peter Drucker, who says culture eats strategy for breakfast, you can easily imagine what the culture of a remote alpine town that is all about hardcore engineering, what that culture did to the newly arriving designers. It's not exactly, the most warmest welcome, let's put it that way. So they didn't survive for many months. And that often is the case. Oh, so the story was told. I was not a personally a witness, but I do know many stories where it was culture that killed the brilliant strategy. Other times, it's one of the pieces missing. So in our research, we identify three. There's seven, but there's three really core pillars of reinvention. They have to work in unison. It's the pillar of anticipated change, which is usually strategy, foresight, scenario planning, that neck of the woods. The second step is designing change. It's innovation, R&D, creativity, and so on. And then once you have what exactly you're reinventing, it's implementing change, which is project management, Scrum Agile, change management, org development. And those camps historically have not been at the best relationship with each other. Very often, and I'm grossly exaggerating, this is mainly for a joke, but very often strategy hates the, soft and mushy-mushy change managers who are all about people, and change managers very often don't want to look at the financial documentation. Innovation wants to live in their own world. Scrum Agile gets more excited about the methodology than the output of the methodology. Again, don't take offense, anyone who, but everyone points fingers at each other and not exactly friendly with each other. And what we see is that either the company is too late to anticipate change, and by that time, even if design and implement works well, it's too late, or design is not done well, and therefore the solution that is put into implementation is unviable or badly thought through, or sometimes illegal in some of the subsidiaries, as I often show cases of board approving decisions that are simply illegal in some regions, so cannot work culturally or otherwise. Or implementation suffers, and you might have a brilliant idea, but who cares if you cannot execute? So it's creating this consistent process: anticipate, design, implement, anticipate, design, implement, so that the moment the disruption hits, you hit around the ground running. You do not waste any time. You don't look at it as a new thing I've never done before. But currently, most organizations treat every disruption as a unique event. COVID was a unique event. Digital was a unique event. AI is a new unique event. Generational change, Generation X versus Generation Z, unique event. They're all exactly the same. Anticipate, design, implement. There's nothing particularly unique about them. If you
Mhm.
have a well-oiled machine, and while your competitors are still disoriented, you already selling your first prototype or you're already pushing the new idea. That's the essence. It's not trying to
Mhm.
chase the trend. The volatility and uncertainty and complexity of the world is such that no expert can tell you which trend will actually prevail. So trying to smell the trend or bet on the trend is not exactly the viable option right now. It's being prepared for any trend whatsoever with the most well-oiled machine. That's what I see killing or saving the companies today.
So it's actually very interesting that you mentioned that, because my next question was about things that we are not yet thinking about, because
Mhm.
everyone talks about AI, automation. There's obviously a lot of political uncertainty these days, a lot of issues related with security. But what is this one thing that you would think about that we are not thinking about yet, that leaders are not thinking about yet?
In terms of the risk map, I think we've covered almost every risk possible to humanity. The issue, of course, is that they're all intertwined, right?
Mhm.
So there is no economical problem or there is no environmental problem. If you want to pick on environmental problem, the earth doesn't care. It will be here
Mhm.
this way or that way. It doesn't matter. It went through many transformation in the past. It's still here. So when we're talking about pollution, it's not the earth that is the issue. It's us. Will we
Mhm.
survive? Earth, we are species that are completely unnecessary. From the point of view of earth, every other species actually functionally useful. We are the only optional. So, from the point of view of environmental, it's not an environmental issue. There's no such thing as an environmental issue. Neither there is a separate social issue, and neither there is economic issue, and so on and so forth. So, the issues right now is that we are thinking in an isolated, this is separate, and then this function or this silo, so this department or this science, this field of science will solve this issue. The problem is that they're all deeply intertwined. So, for me, the wake up call was, and I often tell the story of how I quit my very cozy chaired professorship. I was Coca-Cola chaired professor at a very prestigious executive school. I had this fancy everything. I was, winning awards for books, and I felt so proud of myself. And one day around 2012, I was keynoting a conference, and after that conference, all of us speakers were sitting around the table talking about life and stuff. And one, just out of the blue, asked the question, do you have any hope? Do you have any hope? You are the experts in survival of the civilization. Do you have any hope? And went around the circle. And the consensus was that in this century, we passed the moment of prevention on some of the most crucial risks. We no longer discussing if. We're past it's unpreventable. Climate change, collapse of the monetary system, massive issues around drinkable water, and on and on and on. I can keep
Mhm.
listing the end of mining because we're running out of almost every molecule we can possibly mine virgin, and on, like every challenge you can imagine. So if we're past the moment of prevention, and this century we will face one black swan or a whole herd of black swans. They're coming in numbers now. They don't come alone. They come as a
Mhm.
big company. If that is now the case, what's the option? And if we cannot prevent, the only option is adapt. And I was sitting around that table and I had a kid. My daughter was then around 7 or 8, first grade.
Mhm.
And I was sitting there and thinking, okay, your daughter will live in this century. What's the best thing you can do for her? Because we can no longer prevent. It's a futile effort. And that's where reinvention was born. Is not
Mhm.
do you chase this trend or this trend? Do you have a better report or better foresight session or a better futurist keynoter or a better World Economic Forum's risk map? No, it's about understanding that even if we look at the global trend, the localization of that trend can be very unique to your circumstances. And you need to be able to have an algorithm and a toolkit to adapt to whichever way it will localize. So all of you noticed that with climate already. It's warmer in some areas and it's colder in others, so wetter or drier. So there's no model strong enough in the world, computer-wise. Maybe now with quantum computing we'll get somewhere, but right now we cannot calculate how
Yeah.
specifically this complex system will localize in your town and your city or in your region. So you need to be ready for this and that and that. And that's the essence. Reinvention is the basic literacy of the century, not because um, I have a personal interest in this topic. Of course, I do. But it's mainly because we simply don't know how to predict the reality. So we need to be developing mass levels of skill to adapt to anything that comes our way.
Do you think that there is a myth about reinvention that absolutely needs to be debunked as soon as
Of course.
possible?
Yeah, of course. So myth number one is that reinvention is too small. Let's go for radical innovation. Or reinvention
Mhm,
is too big. We just need incremental. And the answer to that myth is that
mhm,
our research shows that you need all of them, and it's at least 9 different types of reinventions. One of them is
yes.
radical innovation. Another one of them is incremental, Kaizen type, continuous lean type, continuous improvement. But you also need a diversified portfolio and not just those two. So either those who think it's a small, tiny, incremental thing, or those who think it's magnificent, complex, massive thing, you're all correct or you're all wrong because it's a diversified portfolio that has at least 9 different types, and perhaps with research we'll find more. Another myth is
Mhm,
that reinvention is a project. And yes, that was the case when the cycles were long in the 20th century, and we could reinvent every 30, 40 years. And in that case, there was a clean cut beginning, middle, and the end. Today, reinvention is continuous. This is no longer a project, it's a process. And unless you run it as a well oiled process, you will not make it through the speed of change we're facing today.
mhm. And what, perhaps the last question for today, what would be the piece of advice that you would share with your younger self right now?
In the field of reinvention, I would remind myself that I'm born this way. Every baby I know, unless there's a terrible health strategy, is a born reinventor. A baby doesn't need a bonus to start walking. A baby does not give up after falling 100 times. It doesn't sit down and say, this walking thing is not for me. No, we all end up walking. Again, unless there's a health strategy of some sort. We are good at reinvention. We do it for hundreds and hundreds of times per year when we're young. We're just educated out of it. So it's about not so much about learning it, it's about unlearning the behaviors that suggest that stability is good and change is bad. So that would be the first thing to remind myself. But beyond reinvention, what would I say to my younger self is that it's going to be much worse and much better than you expect. And that's the glory of life, this magnificent, sometimes heartbreaking beauty of the life itself. And it will be more than you expect and less than you expect, but at the end, it will be definitely larger and bigger life than you can possibly imagine. And I think that's true for every single one of us.
Nadia, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm quite sure that the community will be super happy with process or when processing the answers and going through the answers while watching it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And thank you for having me again.